Okay.
All right. So welcome everyone to the presentation of the SOP Scholarship Opportunities Workshop. And today we're going to go over what our office is. Hold on one second. Sorry, people in Zoom don't know what's happening, but there was something we had to fix on the monitors in the room itself. So, okay. So I'm going to start over. So welcome to the Scholarship Opportunities Workshop. This one is specifically designed for public health and pre-med, but a lot of the information you're going to get today overlaps with some of the other majors as well, in case you're double majoring or have a minor. Not all of it. When we get to the case studies, what we've tried to do is take examples specifically from your major, but at the same time, some of the information like what our office is and how we differentiate from other organizations on campus. Some of that, if you have friends who couldn't attend today, but they are in your major and they can do a different session, some of the information overlaps. So I'm Dr. David Skelton. I am one of the primary advisors in SOP, meaning what I do is once you have fully committed to, I'm going to apply for a Fulbright or I'm going to apply for a Goldwater or one of our awards, I shepherd you through that process. But we are actually a whole team of not just myself. There's another primary advisor. There's also a director and a lot of student workers. And one of them is here today presenting with me, Karina Garcia. Do you want to tell them about who you are?
Yeah, hi, I'm Karina. I'm a student advisor here at SOP, and I'm a fourth year language science major with a minor in psych.
Thank you. So we're going to now just kind of start off with the presentation. And I know it's kind of awkward because for Zoom people, there are also people in the room that I'm trying to make eye contact with. And room people, I'm also trying to make eye contact with the camera. So bear with me if you don't think I'm not looking at you. It's because I'm trying to look at two different audiences at the same time. And I only have two eyes. So, and if I had four eyes, that would be, well, I do have glasses. So I've heard four eyes before. Anyways, so the next slide, I'm going to let Karina take over for a little bit, and then I will jump back in after she's kind of introduced you to SOP.
Yeah, so welcome again to the Scholarship Opportunity Program with a particular focus on public health and pre-medicine. Again, my name is Karina and I'm a language science major. And today I'll do my best to go over our services and answer any questions that you may have. Feel free to type in the chat if you have any, or for the people who are in the room, you can just raise your hand. And yeah, today we're going to explain what SOP is and what we do and an overview of some of the awards that we advise for and provide some case studies and let you know how to get involved. So, okay. Who we are. So at UCI, you're surrounded by a lot of support that provides opportunities for scholarships and resources for applications. We want to emphasize that SOP is a different entity from UCI's Office of Financial Aid and Scholarships. So this FAFSA basically looks at your FAFSA packet, your FAFSA application, and they also help with more campus-based internal scholarships as well. So definitely check out their scholarship database. They have one as well, and they do smaller awards that have specific requirements such as majors, departments, and other characteristics. So how are we different? We advise for external nationally competitive merit awards. Basically, funding comes from outside organizations, both national and international, who help fund research, graduate school, public service. Outside of funding for any career aspects you may have, some other benefits include lifetime connections, networks, and incredible experiences, both nationally and abroad. And awards give you really great recognition. It's a nice, pretty little bow to put on any resume you may have. And next, we're going to be talking about what SOP is. So the roles and services of the Scholarship and Opportunities Program encompass 3 categories: outreach, advising, and recognition. So outreach would be an example like this, the workshop that we're doing right now to meet with as many UCI students as possible to focus on their needs. And there's so many great opportunities out there for students like you to apply. But many graduate without knowing them because there's just so many on campus. And the next thing is advising. So we support sophomores to recent alumni in applying to prestigious merit-based awards by editing your essays, sharing past winning applications with you, and conducting mock interviews. Sorry, lost my place. Yeah, mock interviews and among other advising services. It's all personalized to each student. No student receives the same cycle of advising. And we guide you through each step of the process so that you're never alone. We hold your hand throughout the entire thing. And scholarship agencies also task us with endorsing candidates for their scholarships. So this basically is a stamp of approval from UCI. When you're applying to these scholarships, we're kind of like UCI's like face, and we're the ones who give you that stamp of approval, letting the scholarship knows that you're a really, really great candidate for these scholarships. And we encourage students to develop their self-awareness and take strategic risks and compete for these prestigious awards. And the last thing is recognition. And at the end of every school year, we have a ceremony that recognizes those who have gone through the SOP application process with us. So next, we're going to talk more in depth about these 21 external nationally competitive merit awards. So our awards are divided into 2 cycles, the Trailblazers 10 and the Explorers 11. Italicized awards are awards that require or strongly encourage campus evaluation and endorsement of enrolled undergraduate applicants. So these are ones that we recommend or are required for you to go through campus endorsement. And international students are eligible to apply for awards that are highlighted in green. And international students who can obtain a work visa to work in the US in the year after they graduate are also eligible for the Carnegie internship. So E11 starts with the pre-applications in October and November. And after working with advisors for 3 to 4 months, applications are submitted to scholarship agencies in winter quarter. And the Explorers 11 group includes all of our undergraduate scholarships, as well as 2 one-year internships for graduating seniors. So these are mainly if you're in your 2nd or 3rd year of your undergraduate career. In April, juniors, seniors, and recent graduates may submit the pre-application for the Trailblazers 10 advising for 10 awards for use after graduation in the US or abroad, including graduate study awards. So the next thing is, why do these scholarships matter? Winners and finalists of these prestigious scholarships are highly on their resumes. Include these highly recognizable awards on their resumes for the rest of their lives. And one component of UCI's national rankings is how many prestigious scholarship winners we have. And winners essentially raise UCI's profile. These scholarships are not just about the money, but also about personal development. You grow a great deal through these processes of applying, and even those who do not win will learn strategies that help them get placed in top graduate schools and enter in excellent careers. One thing you'll find out if you do our process is a lot of the components that you do during these application cycles are really, really great for your grad apps as well. And one instance of this is a student recently applied for the Fulbright to the United Kingdom. And although he did not win a Fulbright, he formed faculty connections at his top choice graduate school in the UK and planned a strong graduate research project through our application process. And eventually he was admitted to the program and found external funding in the UK. So the Fulbright, even though he didn't get it, it was his really, really big stepping stone to getting what he wanted in the end, essentially. So the next thing is, I'll pass it off to David.
And I'm going to go back just to the very first slide real quick, just to remind you, because I forgot to remind you when we started, that this QR code, you're going to see it a few times. If you haven't used it to check in, please scan it, use it, check in. It really helps us in terms of knowing who all is attended and we've reached, and also helps us figure out to give you more information and with your contact information, so we can let you know about other workshops we're having, other opportunities that are out there. So please scan this and fill out the information you haven't. So now is where we're going to look at public health and pre-med, in particular students who have won some of the awards that are in that area. And the first award, the Strauss Foundation Award, is actually it's a large umbrella award in that you can use it for basically any discipline, but we have had a lot of success for people who, thank you, for people who have done focused on medical projects. And so what the Strauss is looking for is they are looking for projects, and you're thinking, well, what kind of project? Really, they don't place a limit on it. It's up to your own imagination of, if you can receive $15,000, what would you use it for your community? Some people, when they think of community, they think of UCI. Some people think of Orange County. We've had people do projects in Oakland. And so it really depends on what you're looking for. But what they really want to do is fund something that is sustainable as well. So they want you to make an impact and bring others along with you. And so people often talk with campus partners or other organizations in their cities to help them with the project. We had an international student recently look at homelessness in Thailand and working with nonprofit organizations there. So this is also a good award for undergrads and for international students to think about applying for. It's part of our E11 cycle. And the picture of the Arya Vista Garden, that was started by one of the Strauss Foundation projects. So Strauss applicants come from all disciplines and backgrounds, different majors and careers. The project spans for a year, and what they're looking for is people with leadership experience and a well-conceived idea. If you just want to I want to take care of poverty in Orange County, that's great, but you have to define what are your metrics, how are you measuring that, what are you doing with the money, what organizations are you working with? And so there's the difference between a great idea and a more specific kind of Strauss project. So an example of that, wrong computer again. Did I go too far? Is Stephen our example? Yeah. Okay. So Stephen Gong is one of the examples of someone in medicine and biology who is a Strauss scholar. He's not our most recent Strauss scholar, but he did win a few years back. He's a third-year triple major in human biology, economics, and political science with a minor in medical humanities. So his resume includes winning the Lao Student Body Leadership Award. He was an intern for ASUCI, where he served at the at-large senator chair for the COVID response and vice chair of finance. And Stephen won the Strauss for his project to establish the California Health Advocacy Network. And what this is an ambassador-based subsidiary of the California Physician Alliance. So that was the outside organization that he partnered with, was the California Physician Alliance, to recruit youth in addressing health coverage disparities throughout California, guided by a commitment to the intersection of healthcare and public service and the vision of healthcare as a fundamental human right. So Stephen aspires to leverage his experience in healthcare, government, and business, and eventually work as a physician advocate and public servant with the United States Public Health Service. After the Strauss project, which Stephen has already gone through, he recently has interned in DC. He was part of the speech writing team for Jill Biden when Queen Elizabeth died, and has applied for other awards in our cycle. So he's really used the Strauss as a stepping stone for other things that he has been trying to achieve. Another science-based scholarship, and in many ways the most prestigious undergraduate award in the sciences, is the Goldwater Scholarship. Now, what's a little tricky for my public health and pre-med folks is that MD PhDs have a little bit of a harder time winning the Goldwater. Now, when I say harder time, I'm not meaning impossible. In fact, one of our most recent Goldwater winners was an MD PhD. But what Goldwater, the reason why it's a harder time is that Goldwater wants to make sure that they are funding somebody who's going to dedicate themselves to research. If you're going to med school, which I know is hard to get into, but if you just want to go to med school to then start a family practice or any other practice, and you just want to practice medicine, that is great, but that's not what Goldwater wants. What Goldwater is looking for, if someone is going to get an MD, they want to know that that MD is crucial to you and your research plans and your research agenda. So there's actually an extra, it's not that long, but there's an extra essay that's about a page long that you have to write if you're applying for the Goldwater's MD, PhD, to talk about why practicing medicine is essential for you as a researcher and how you would connect the two. So there's just something to think about. I'm not trying to discourage you from applying to it, but just letting you know that Goldwater wants researchers, people that are going to be in the lab. And so it's something you can apply for as a sophomore or as a junior. And if you win it, they pay $7,500 for your undergraduate study. You get it for 2 years if you win as a sophomore, or for 1 year if you win it as a junior. And by junior and sophomore, what most of these award foundations mean is when you're going to graduate. So you might say, well, according to hours, I'm a senior, but if you're according to years, you have a year left or 2 years left. That's how they base what your classification is. So the Goldwater, what it requires is for you, yes, it's for undergraduate study, person in the chat. It's not for graduate study. So the Goldwater, what they want is for you to write about what got you into research, what got you into the sciences, talk about your research experience, if you've done any poster presentations or that sort of stuff. And then you have a research component where you write up a research proposal. Many students write up something that they're already doing in the lab, but some students will also write a more theory-based proposal of research that they would like to do or like to accomplish, but it still has charts and figures and references, so it is more of a research-oriented project. But it's not easy to win, but it's easier to win now than it used to be. They used to have alternates and winners, but now they've gotten rid of alternates and increased the pool of winners. So now around 400 people win each year. So I highly encourage you, if you're thinking about research, to go for it. So Lucy Yang is one of our most recent Goldwater winners. Her major was in chemistry and biological sciences. Lucy's a Regent Scholar. She serves as secretary, or I should say served because she graduated, as secretary for the undergraduate chapter of the American Chemical Society. She was a certified learning assistant for organic chemistry. She tutored for the Writing Center. She also founded a website called the Kawaii Chemist?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is a shop where she uses art and cartoons to share her love for science. And her academic interests include understanding biological systems through a chemical lens and the origins of life biochemistry, including research projects on in vitro selection of ATP binding RNA molecules and the energetics and kinetics of prebiotic metabolites, specifically RNA ribozymes. And so Lucy, she is now in a PhD program. I believe she's at Harvard. You know? Okay. And is a research, and she wants to be a research professor who studies RNA and its properties as a therapeutic and diagnostic tool. I know that she won the same year as Pratyusha. Pratyusha's at Stanford, but I couldn't remember. I think that Lucy's at Harvard. So, okay, thanks. Yes. Did I go too far? Okay. Thank you. So another award that is medical adjacent, but you have to think about, okay, what do I want to do with medicine to see if it's a good fit for you, is the Truman Scholarship. The Truman Scholarship you can only apply for as a junior And this is not academic status. It's again, when are you graduating? So think about how many more years. If you have 2 years left to graduate, then you qualify. And what they want is public service. In particular, their buzzword that they love, if you read anything in the Truman website, is they're looking for change agents. They love the term change agents. But what they're looking for is people who are leaders in the community. And so in particular, public health, and thinking about public health policy, or thinking of advocacy. If that's something that really interests you, then they are interested in you as a candidate. They want to help pay for your graduate school, but while you're in graduate school, they pair you with a mentor in Washington, D.C., and you also help in the summertime, intern there and serve as part of the government. So it's, again, it's not that MD is off the table, but it depends upon what you want to do. If being a doctor, but using that as advocacy and government capacity is something that you want to do, then the Truman is great for you. If you don't want to touch government like at all, and you just want to get your degree and be a doctor and not worry about it, then it might not be great for you, because Truman is going to ask you to talk about your leadership in the community, and they're also going to ask you to write a mock policy proposal where you pretend like, okay, I'm going to write something for the governor or write something for a senator, and you write some sort of bill that you would propose, because they want to see how your mind thinks, like what is important to you as a project. And so here we do get more people on the public health side than we do the pre-med side, but I don't want to rule that out, because Truman doesn't rule that out. They just want to know, if you're going to go the med school route, how you're going to government advocacy and that sort of stuff that you're going to do along with that. Something that's quite similar in terms of Truman, but whereas Truman is DC national focused, California Capitol Fellows is a project that is focused on government in California itself. And in very similar ways, they do ask you to either write a policy proposal or to evaluate a policy. So for example, I had a student recently write about wheelchair access in Long Beach, or the lack thereof, and talk about ways to maybe use the trolley system and some other things to ameliorate that problem. And so, but they want you to talk about policies that you would want to implement, or policies that you agree with and why, or policies that you disagree with. But policy is really important. And what you do is you say that you either want to work for, and you can actually apply for all three, but that you want to work with the executive branch, the judicial branch, or the legislative branch. If you apply for all three, you do have to write 3 different essays. So just throwing that out there. But it's another way to kind of get involved in the government side. And again, a lot of people who do care about healthcare, but care about health policy, will apply for the California Capitol Fellows. So an example of this is Emily Ha. Emily is a first-generation graduating senior studying business, economics, and public health policy with a specialization in global economy and international issues at the University of California, Irvine. She served on the board of the Dean's Ambassador Council, contributed to research projects in Asian American Studies, sociology, and public health. She volunteered at CHOC, which is the Children's Hospital of Orange County, which is where my wife works, but they didn't meet each other because it's a big hospital. And she also led, not that y'all need to know any of that, sorry. And she also led the Prison Education Project. She studied abroad at the National University of Singapore, where she grew her passion for healthcare and conducted independent research on wealth and inequality. She was named a semi-finalist for the Fulbright English Teaching Assistantship, which I'm going to talk to you about that in 1 second, in Vietnam, and a finalist for the Executive Fellow internship at the California Capitol Fellows. In the future, Emily hopes to pursue a master's in public health and business administration to become a healthcare leader and advocate. So now let's talk about Fulbright. The Fulbright is, if not our most popular, then one of our most popular awards for people to apply for in the T10 cycle. So we have been talking about with the Goldwater and the Truman and the Strauss, all of those are part of our E11 cycle. these are now part of the Fulbright, and then the award I'm going to talk about after the Fulbright is part of our T10 cycle, which is more for graduate study abroad experiences and for people that are alumni. The Fulbright has multiple avenues because the Fulbright really cares about being a cultural ambassador, and it cares a lot about mutual relationships abroad. It was founded after World War II by Senator J. William Fulbright from Arkansas, who looked around at the world and thought, we've had 2 world wars, and how do we make a difference? And his vision was, if we could get people from America to go to other countries and people from other countries to come to America, and young people could meet each other and learn about each other and see each other as human beings, that they could have a cultural exchange, and that maybe we would have a more peaceful world. Now, it's a still great ideal to hold. We're going to always have wars because people are evil, but it's a good vision, and it's only grown. Now, how has it expanded since Fulbright's lifetime? How it has expanded is that there's now 3 main programs. There's an English teaching assistantship program. And what that program is for people to go to another country to teach English as a second language. They're often now where you are placed depends upon the country. So for example, if you go to Greece, they want people who are willing to teach in a university setting. But if, say, you go to like Malaysia or Laos, they are going to put you probably more in a secondary school or an elementary school. You'll probably be more rural. Some places you'll be more in the city. So it really depends upon where you want to go. Now, you might say, well, I'm not, my major is in education, so they're not going to want me. That's not true. If you've had any sort of tutoring experience or any sort of leadership experience, if you were even a camp counselor, you've had some experience to advocate for yourself as somebody that could be in front of young people. And what they're looking for is your passion for the country and what you hope to contribute to it, and what you also hope to, because mutual exchange. So it's not just what you hope to contribute, but also what you hope to learn. And that's what you write about. Outside of the English Teaching Award, they also have a master's degree award where you would find a master's program in that country that you want to go. And what you would write about is, yes, I could study this in the US, but it's more important for me to study this in Finland or in Australia or in Singapore or Vietnam. Why are you picking those countries? Because they have the best research in this area. Something along those lines is what you would be saying in your Fulbright application, and why you want to get a master's degree there. The third one is the Fulbright Research, which is very similar, but for the Fulbright Research, you already have a research project that you want to do that's fully fleshed out in your mind, and you know that it has an international component. And so you're saying, like, I want to go to the University of Berlin because they have this lab and I'm going to use it in this way. Or as a recent student of mine, my professor has a relationship with this professor in Brazil. We already are collaborating on genetics. And so I'm going to write a Fulbright proposal to continue my research with this professor in Brazil. And then I can bring that back to what I'm doing already in America. Like, that's an example. Now, the study research, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's harder to win if you're an undergraduate, because people who are writing their master's thesis or their dissertation have a much more developed research ideas and connections. So I won a Fulbright, which is why I love it. It's near and dear to my heart. But I use my doctoral dissertation as my Fulbright study research award. But I had a friend who did it in his master's program, so it's not impossible. But you get more if you're an undergraduate or a recent alumni. You'll have more success for the ETA if it's like Fulbright or bust. Question, or were you just yawning?
Oh,
yes.
oh, no.
Okay. You look like you had a epiphany for a second, and I was just okay. So an example of a UCI Fulbright winner is Win May. So Sunny immigrated to the United States from China and became a citizen. Now the Fulbright through our office is only for US citizens. And that's because it's founded by the State Department. That's where the money comes from. Go ahead.
Sorry,
Okay,
Yeah, I don't know what.
they didn't. They don't, oh, that got messed up right here?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Okay. I created all these, so it's probably my fault. Okay. So, it is, but it's you have to have US citizenship. So if you're born in another country, you can apply for a Fulbright, but only if you have US citizenship. Because it is Fulbright through our country is done through the State Department. Now, if you're an international student, you can apply through Fulbright, but you have to do it through your government, through your country. And our office, because we are at a state school that's funded by the government, like our office works with the US applicants. Does that make sense? So it's not like we're trying to tell you international students you can't apply for Fulbright. You just can't apply through Fulbright through our office because we're working with the US office. So no, permanent residents can apply for Fulbright, but they can press in the chat. They can't apply for Fulbright, but they have to do it through the Fulbright office in their country because you have to do it through whichever office that you're a citizen of. Because what Fulbright is trying to do is get someone from different countries. So say somebody from Germany wants to apply for a Fulbright and they want to come to America. A Germany person is going to come to America, an American person is going to go to Germany. And they're always trying to balance the numbers and that sort of stuff. And so we can't work with multiple countries' governments. We're only working with the US government. But if you are a citizen of another country, then you would use your government office. So May, it's a triple major in anthropology, international studies, and public health sciences. Published research in academic journals, received the Chancellor's Awards of Distinction and Order of Merit at the School of Social Sciences. She worked as a peer academic advisor, volunteered at Orange County AIDS Foundation, and served as a volunteer aide in Nepal during the summer. Fulbright program, which was on research in Nigeria, is on reducing the stigma of Ebola virus disease with community-based education programs. So that's an example of someone taking research that they were already doing and then applying for a Fulbright to be able to conduct that research in Nigeria. In terms of health, Fulbright actually does have awards that are only major-based awards. And what I mean by that is it's not like major or minors in terms of like these awards are better than others, but in terms of like if you're an art major, then there's only some Fulbright awards that only art majors can apply for. Or in this case, if you're a health major, some of the awards that you might be thinking of is the Western Sydney Public University Public Health Awards. The Netherlands has an award for childhood cancer research. Taiwan has an award for a PhD or master's in global health, and Spain has an award for an application for the School of Global and Public Affairs. So for these awards, you would apply for a study or research award for those countries, but then you would specify in your essays that the reason why you're applying to Spain is because you want to work with the School of Global and Public Affairs, and this is why. So other big graduate awards in our teach-in cycle, we're going to look at the broad ones first and then the domestic ones. These are some of the big names that you've probably heard of. So outside of Fulbright, the other major kind of international scholarship that a lot of people have heard of is the Rhodes, because it's the oldest, one of the most prestigious awards in the world. To get this award, you have to go to Oxford, which I know going to Oxford, that sucks, doesn't it? No, I mean, you're not going to be applying for anywhere else. Like in your application, you're going to be talking about why going to Oxford, it makes sense for you, what you hope to gain from it. So it's not an application, it's not just a general grad school application that you're just like throwing anywhere. Like you really need to do your research on what Oxford offers, the English education system, and like why that would be necessary for you. The Gates Cambridge is a more recent award, but it's patterned off the Rhodes. It's just Cambridge wants to get its ring in the hat too. So come to Cambridge, which I like Cambridge better than Oxford. But you know, don't tell Oxford people, not that I know anybody from Oxford. I do know a couple people from Cambridge though. So maybe that's why I like them better, because yeah, well, not just Teresa. I know some people from when I went to Cambridge. When I was on the Fulbright, I went to Cambridge and hung out with some people, and they bought me some food. So, you know, that's why I like them better. Nobody from Oxford bought me any free food. So the Marshall and the Mitchell are some other awards. The Marshall what's different, the Marshall is also very similar to the Rhodes, but what's different than the Marshall is you can apply to any university in the UK. So maybe Oxford does not have the best public health program that you're interested in. Maybe you're better at the University of Exeter or the University of Aberdeen or the University of I'm running out of British universities, but I know the name of what is the name of the chocolate place with the Cadbury eggs? I'm going blank now. I actually know someone who teaches there too. Oh, well. Sorry, Charlotte. Thanks for the coffee, but I forgot where you teach at. But there's a lot of British universities out there. And just like America has areas where some colleges might have a better engineering program, or maybe different colleges have great science programs, but one college in particular is really good at polymer science. Those are the types of things you want to look at when you're applying for the Marshall, in that you're trying to think about what university you really want to go to in England and why, and make a case for what specialty areas they have and how that connects with your own research. And in many ways, which hard to believe, the Marshall is more research oriented than the Rhodes. The Rhodes is looking at you as a whole person. They, in fact, on their website, they say they want people that are not just bookworms. They are looking for a lot of political leaders apply for the Rhodes and try to get the Rhodes who want to one day be president or one day be Secretary of State or whatever. The Marshall, you'll see a lot more people who are more research oriented go for that. Same thing with Mitchell, it's in Ireland, and the Schwarzman is for global studies in China. I need to speak faster so that we can make sure we have time for questions. Domestic awards, there's very similar process, but the domestic-based graduate scholarship awards, the Knight Hennessy is for Stanford. This one, international, actually all the graduate study ones like that we're talking about, international students can apply for, and they can apply through our office. The Knight Hennessy Award is for anyone who wants to go to Stanford. Now, the catch is you have to get into Stanford, so that is hard, but it's rare, but I have had a student who's applied for Knight Hennessy, and they were a finalist for Knight Hennessy, but then they didn't get in the chemistry program that they wanted to get into at Stanford, so then they had to decline the Knight Hennessy. So that does happen. It's just the Knight Hennessy is a really hard process, because the Knight Hennessy Award, they are funding your graduate study at Stanford, and you're going through an interview process with them while you're applying to get into Stanford and doing an interview process with the department at Stanford. Now, so if you win both, it's amazing. You've gotten into Stanford and you've gotten an award that pays for all of your graduate study at Stanford, but it is a very arduous process. So I'm not saying that to discourage you. I'm just saying that if it's something you really want to go for, that mentally can be very taxing. I'm going to this interview over here for the Knight Hennessy people, and I'm going to this interview over here for the Stanford people, and I need them both to work out and mesh up for me. The Paul and Daisy Soros Award is for people who are first generation Americans. And so what they're looking for there is for people who are committed to graduate study and graduate research, but whose parents were born in another country. And so what they're trying to do is encourage first generation Americans to continue with graduate school, because it's often harder for first generation Americans to have the same connections in the country that people have who've lived here for a long time. And statistically, a lot of first generation Americans don't continue undergraduate, much less go all the way through graduate school. So Paul and Daisy Soros, their foundation, is meant to encourage first generation Americans to go all the way, to go to graduate school, to follow their dreams, and there's funding in that regard. And then the biggest award in the sciences for graduate studies is the NSF. And in many ways, it's very similar to the Goldwater. It's just the application is a little bit longer for the NSF. And I have students that actually do couple that. So I'll have a student who applies for Goldwater, sophomore, junior, regardless if they win it or not. And then they will take part of that application and expand upon it for the NSF. The NSF you can apply for twice. You can apply for as a senior, meaning your very last year before you would start graduate studies. And then you can also apply for it again if you didn't get it in graduate school. So I'll also have students that strategize, like, do I want to apply for it twice in case I don't win it? Like, Those are just things to think about, but it pays for your graduate study in the sciences. Go ahead.
It's 4:43, and then also, the deadline should be April 7th.
I thought I fixed that.
So, just let the people know.
Okay, okay, I'm sorry. No, we're wrapping up. I think this is the last of the. So the deadline there, we're gonna put that in the chat. While you're doing that, I'm gonna hit the button for the next slide. Okay, and so the last thing I want to talk about, and then we're gonna turn it back over to Karina to just kind of talk about the SOP process, is that it's hard to, when you're looking at 21 awards funded by different organizations, it's hard to overgeneralize, but all of them have one of these components, either some research project or a policy proposal, some sort of proposal that you write. They all have some personal statement, which for many students, the personal statement is the hardest thing to write because you're talking about yourself and you're talking about what motivates you and what you care about and why, and having to be introspective. And then sometimes you only have one page to do that. And so that's really hard. Letters of recommendation, usually a CV or resume, and then application forms is like general stuff, like what's your address, what's your contact information, what classes are you taking, and then usually a transcript. And so most applications will have these components. So I get really passionate about these awards, so I took a little too long. So I'm going to now turn it over to Karina to talk now that you've learned about what SOP is, you learned about a lot of the awards up there that are connected to pre-med, but now how do we connect the two together?
Alrighty, so just to kind of wrap things up, we're just going to talk about what you can do right now to kind of get started on your application journey or your SOP journey, whatever that looks like for you right now. So the first thing is, many students think that there's kind of like a formula for success, and like I said earlier, everything is kind of individualized. It depends on what you want to do, and what your application looks like. But if we want to generalize just a little bit, what we do is we customize your plan according to your goals, and to take strategic risks. So we'll help you with that along the way, and develop resilience and flexibility, and to appreciate and tell your own stories. Like David said, the personal statement is always the hardest. And again, like, we work together with you to help you reach your goals. And then the next thing is use campus resources strategically. Like I said at the beginning, there's so many resources on campus that are available to you. The biggest thing that you can do for your entire professional career is make relationships with faculty and other mentors. And this can be as early as your first year or as late as your fourth year. The timeline, we work with whatever timeline that you have. And then research is a really, really great one if that's something you're interested in. Europe is a phenomenal resource for that. Studying abroad is optional, but who doesn't love the chance to be able to go and live abroad and learn another language or something? I actually did it. It was really great. Pursuing internships and community service. There's a lot of clubs on campus that are dedicated to community service and internships relating to your field or any passions you may have. And then leadership opportunities, clubs, ASUCI, things like that. And then reputable honor societies like Phi Beta Kappa. And GPA and coursework are only part of the selection criteria. These scholarships really like to look at people as a whole, who you are as an individual, not just who you are as a student. And the next thing is for being competitive. Being strategic isn't about checking off a list, and your journey basically maps out onto the application process. And being competitive helps you explore who you are as a person and get the most out of your UCI experience, so that when you graduate, you can have as many resources and experience as you can for the rest of your academic or professional journey. And we help you reflect on your experience and convey it in writing, so that any statement of grant purposes that you write, or personal statements, anything like that, are the best they can be. And then you can also use them for grad apps, things like that. And so this is how you can get started with SOP. Let me go to the slide real quick. And this is basically just an outline of everything that we do. And the step number one is attending one of the workshops, which you guys are doing right now. And the next thing that you could do is to visit our website and browse these scholarships more in depth. And then once you kind of have a feel of what you want, or even if you have no clue, you can schedule an appointment with a student advisor who will kind of guide you through whatever process you have in mind and see what options are available to you. And then the next thing is enroll in SOP prep, which we will talk about in a little bit, to kind of begin your scholarship journey. And then the last thing is the pre-application for your desired scholarship or scholarships. And then we will also kind of talk about this in a little bit as well. So yeah, this is SOP Prep. It is a non-UCI affiliated course. It's through Canvas, but not the UCI Canvas. Just want to make that distinction. It doesn't affect your GPA or how many units you're taking. And it's a way for you to get started on thinking about who you are as a candidate and who you are as a person. Why do you want to study what you want to study? What do you want to do with it? And it's self-paced and available year-round, so you can enroll in it today if you wanted to, and then get it done before whatever pre-app cycle it is you're applying for. And yeah, it's available on our website to enroll. So let's see. Yeah, this is what it's going to look like on your end. It's just a couple of journals and like a SMART goals. If a lot of high schools make you do that your senior year, and they're really, really short. They're around 300 words. You can pace yourself if you want, or do it all in one go, up to what your workload is and your style of time management. And then at the end of it, you book a personalized advising consultation with a student advisor to get you started on your journey. And then here is the pre-app. The pre-application is, there's one for each cycle, and unlike SOP Prep, you have to do it before your desired cycle. So the T10 you can only do for the T10 when that opens. And this is where we get to look at you more as a candidate. So this is where we ask for who you can ask for a letter of recommendation, any languages that you may speak other than English, study abroad, experience, and what you want to do with your scholarship journey, essentially. And then here we are wrapping it up. Let's see, go real quick. And then I will pass it off to David to talk more about Phi Beta Kappa.
So just real quick, outside of the T10 and E11, the other thing that our office does a lot of work with is Phi Beta Kappa, which is the nation's oldest and most prestigious honor society. It is one that, for example, that Chancellor Gilman was a member or is a member of, and is very important. It's coming up on its 200th anniversary. So it's just something to think about. It's as far as like how you get in, that's a very complicated process. Look on their website, and they usually look at the top 4.
1%.
1% of juniors, 5% of seniors, and send out invites. But outside of the invitations to the Honor Society itself, we also have PBK events. So we have speakers that come each year to do events, and like the one last year was on Buddhism, the one this year is on aging, and that's open to the public. And we have some other events that are open to the public for you to just engage with our office and to learn more from. The other thing that we want to talk about is that we are hiring. So if you, is that date right? Is that date right? Okay, just making sure, because we've had some wrong dates in the slide, so I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so we're looking for more advisors to do kind of what Karina's doing today. A lot of our great student team, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately for them, but they're graduating, and which is great for them, but you know, we always need more help. So please come and join us and be a part of our team. Anything you want to say about that?
This is a really great job. So that's the only thing.
Okay, she says it's a great job, although you do have to put up with my corny jokes. Okay, and so again, I'm going to remind you to scan the QR code if you haven't done so we can keep track of who's here, get your contact information. This is a larger picture of our team, including the other primary advisor, Teresa, Rose, who's our director, and Yusuf, who's our new administrative coordinator, and our other student workers. A lot of them, like I said, are graduating. So if you know you want to hang out with Aline, she's not going to be here next year. But yeah, you're graduating as well, right? So, but in terms of engaging with our office, you can email us at scholars@uci.edu. You can also, the same info for our website. You can self-enroll in SOP prep right now, just to kind of get your feet wet and explore some of the questions. And then you can also schedule appointments and or visit drop-in hours. And thank you so much for attending. And now I'm going to spend some time on questions, either from the room or the chat, or as my kids' teachers like to say, the roomies or the zoomies. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, so the last thing in the chat was correcting the deadline.
Are there any questions or? They're all good? Yeah, that's another thing. If you can't think of any questions right now, or if you think about them later, or look at our website or any of the materials that we provided today, you can go ahead and schedule an appointment with us through our office. It'll just be the UCI appointment system that you use to make an appointment anywhere else on campus. But yeah, we're always here. You can drop by our office. It's at the 5th floor, literally on the other side of the elevators. Or you can shoot us an email at scholars@uci.edu. And access to the slides, there's going to be a recording posted on our website once we get everything settled and stuff. But yeah, under our events like drop down menu. So yeah, it'll be up on our website soon.
Thank you.
And
I had a question, so like on the website, I think it mentioned that we scholarships kind of like fund professional student and who I got from that is one of them being the Night Princess Store and the Palm Breezes Store. But I'm wondering if that could potentially.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just Night Hennessy and Soros. Night Hennessy is specifically at Stanford, and then Soros is for anywhere in the US.
Right.
Both the parents have to have been born outside the US. Is there one?
I have to think about Truman. Truman is more policy oriented, but you could go to med school, but let me double check on that because I don't want to give you wrong information.
if you want, you can email us your question at the email address, and then we'll just type it out for you and give you a more in-depth response.
But Truman is really complicated because same thing with like Willie Holt Fund Law School. They don't really say no, but they don't really say yes either, because it's like, are you committed to government and policy? If you can go to med school and law school, but still do that, then yes, but it's hard to say, I'm going to work on Capitol Hill and go to law school and med school at the same time.
Alrighty then, well, if there's no more questions, and we want to thank you guys again for attending the workshop. There's going to be more throughout the rest of this week and next week if you have more interest in just pre-med and public health. And then as always, our office is always open to you guys. So thank you.
You can track this one right now.
That's true. Thank you. That was very